Hello, world singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is
It's
Cosmere
Cosmere
Conversations. My friends from all around, we have a brilliant guest today that I am so excited to talk about. We met for the first time at Dragonsteel Nexus 2025 and was on a panel with Hayden Gray from the Fantasy Fan Fellas podcast and the Fantasy Fan Network of podcasts. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, as well as get into a broader conversation about things that we want to defend. We want this to be like, we are defending certain aspects of fantasy, romantasy, and of course the Cosmere. And so, Hayden, thank you so much for joining. It is a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. I don't think anyone has ever described me as brilliant. So this is like already going so great. I appreciate it. And also, I was so excited when you guys reached out because I don't know if I told you guys this, but when I went to Dragonsteel this year, I was by myself. I had no friends in the community, and you guys were so warm and accepting and let me go to lunch with you guys the day of our panel. So you guys really helped kind of calm those nerves for Dragonsteel. And now next year, I'm so excited to go back because I feel like I'm going back to theater camp. So it's amazing.
It was such a serendipitous circumstance because even before Nexus, in like the spring or summer, I had listened to the episode of Fantasy Fangirls that you had been on talking about the Cosmere. That's when the algorithm, of course, chose to serve that to me. And I was telling Tyler, I was like, hey, this seems really cool. Like, we should reach out and see if, the Fantasy Fangirls want to chat and do like a romantasy kind of crossover. And then it just so happened that we got put on a panel together at Nexus. Yeah. And I'm so glad that we're finally here after all this time.
Fun. I love it.
Yeah, so we were on a panel together at Nexus, and that definitely started our cooperation because we're working on that in the background before Nexus starts. I want to talk a little bit about our origin story and just kind of like what you felt about Dragonsteel Nexus and kind of going to your first one, because you've been to other cons and you have a longer history of like professional experience as a producer for podcasts. So I'd like to get your insight, but I want to begin with the way we start all of our interviews, asking who is your favorite character in the Cosmere, and or what Knight Radiant Order do you most identify with?
So I think folks from my audience who are going to listen to this show, they're going to have a little bit of a reckoning listening to this, because if you listen to Fantasy Fan Fellas, I am all about Zayzed. Like, I ride and die for Zayzed, especially through the first trilogy of Mistborn.
Yeah.
However, he's not my favorite Cosmere character. He's my favorite character from Mistborn.
Mistborn, gotcha.
But not within the Cosmere.
That's fair.
Yeah, so for me, the number one is Kaladin. Just from the beginning of Way of Kings all the way through Wind and Truth, Way of Kings, we just see this huge journey for him. The moment with him at the Honor Chasm when Syl inadvertently saves him, I just root for him so much. And what I love about Kaladin is that I don't relate to him. I haven't dealt with some of the things that he's dealt with, but he is someone who, when there are challenging times in my life to come, I know that I'm going to look to him as I move forward. And so I just really admire him. I mean, Dalinar has to get a mention as well, just because Oathbringer is my favorite Sanderlanche of all time.
Yeah.
But it has to go to Kaladin for me. And then in terms of my Knights Radiant Order, I feel like I've had a similar journey as I did with my Hogwarts house.
Okay.
Because when I grew up, I was Harry Potter for like 7 consecutive Halloweens.
Oh, that's so cute.
And so, yeah, right. And so I thought that I was a Gryffindor. And then as I grew up to be an adult, everybody you ask will say that I'm a Hufflepuff. So I've just kind of adopted Hufflepuff.
Hufflepuff pride.
Yeah, right. And so I initially thought I was a Windrunner just because that's what you want to be. You want to be a part of
course.
Exactly. But I think I would be an Edge Dancer, actually.
Love
and,
it. guys.
Yeah, I
We're on the same wavelength, Hayden. I'm a Hufflepuff.
yes.
I'm also an edge dancer.
Yeah, and I really love the ideals around edge dancers, with the idea of, not to get any more spoilers than this, but remembering and
Hmm.
listening. And what I love about ideals is that they not only ask you to do something for others, but also do something for yourself.
Hmm.
And so I look at the edge dancer ideals as the idea of remembering the parts of yourself that perhaps you've forgotten, and to listening to your inner voice. So I think I would be an edge dancer, and I just imagine myself kind of like ice skating across the world, basically.
That's so beautiful. I love that so much.
Yeah, I think that edge dancing is particularly cool as we see Lyft develop and grow. And by the time we get to the back half, I think there's going to be a lot more edge dancing inspired folks. Like you were saying with Windrunners at the start, like that's what we know. I want to be part of Bridge 4.
Yeah,
I feel like in the second half, we're going to see a lot of different cool stuff from edge dancers. Because
yeah,
I think in one of the either spoiler streams or just when Brandon was talking about how Knights Radiance used to operate, edge dancers are like battlefield medics, but they're also kind of like fighting alongside everyone. So I
Mhm.
yeah.
definitely imagine them like weaving and moving
Weaving,
through,
yeah.
yeah, just kind of like skating around the battlefield, fighting some here, healing some there, and just having a very like fluid nature. And
Yeah.
it's going to be really cool to see Lift as she develops in the second half.
I won't say more about that right now. We're in the
This
non-spoiler
Right.
is true.
portion
We're
of,
trying to
of the
keep
episode.
the first half just for anyone who is joining us. Cosmere Conversations are hashtag all spoilers all the time. All we do is talk spoilers. Our very first episode, not a great one to start with if you haven't read the whole Cosmere. And that's it was just kind of like
To be fair, the whole Cosmere up to 2017. So
right, but still a lot of
yeah.
books. And I know many people from your audience are coming in fresh to Mistborn. And so they've
Yes.
only read Mistborn. So we are not going to have huge spoilers for any of the Cosmere books. Certainly not going into like in game stuff. But in the second half, we'll kind of bring you in because I know that's one of the things you have read most of or all of the Cosmere, but often don't get to talk about it. And so we were having these conversations off mic, and I was really excited to kind of let you out of the cage a little
Yeah.
bit that you're kept
Yes.
with. So when it comes to our background, like we said, we met at Dragonsteel Nexus. And tell me a little bit about how you found yourself in that situation, because the Fantasy Fan Girls
Yes.
was a popular podcast that you were serving as their producer. And I believe that you knew the host there. And so just like tell me a little bit about how that kind of developed and then the launch of your podcast, Fantasy Fan Fellas.
Yeah, so I had been working in the podcast industry since I believe 2021 or so. I started my first podcast during the pandemic in my closet. I did, the
Of
pandemic
course.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I just started working in the industry, and I had kind of made my way into sports. I
Hmm.
was working for a soccer media network
Hmm.
and was just really unhappy. I mean, I spent about 2 years, I didn't have really a single weekend off, just because the sports calendar is so concentrated around
Yeah.
the weekend. And I was just, on the side looking for other opportunities. And then Nicole, who's one of the hosts of the Fantasy Fangirls podcast, I went to school with her. She went to my wedding, everything. So we were good friends. And then she started posting about this new podcast that she was doing, covering Fourth Wing with her sister,
Hmm.
and how it was absolutely exploding. And so, first of all, I was mad at her because I said, "Why didn't you reach out to me? You know that I do this podcast thing." And so I messaged her and I said, "Hey, I was just curious, like, do you need any help with this? If your show is blowing up, you probably have some things in the background that need to be taken care of." And so then one Zoom call later, I essentially was just like hopping on as their executive producer. And since then, I've just helped them run their business. I went full time with them about 6 months later. And we've gotten to travel around the country. We've done live shows, we've done conventions. And as we got through the first year and a half of existing as a business where we finally got our feet settled and we knew kind of where we stood, we thought to ourselves, what's next? Like, how do we continue to increase our footprint upon the space? And I basically what had happened was this. I started reading along with all the different books so I could edit the show effectively.
Mhm.
But it's kind of like when you're in college and you're assigned a book to read, you're not doing it for the joy of just reading. And so I told myself, I want to find some books that are for me. And I started with Mistborn, and it was all downhill from there, basically. And I've fallen in love with the Cosmere. And so as we started to think about what would other shows under the FFG network look like, I kind of raised my hand and said, listen, I think Mistborn is a great entry point for folks who might already love Romantasy to kind of start dipping their toe into something like the Cosmere.
Hmm.
And so from there, it was just kind of slowly developing the idea. And then we finally launched in November. And I actually ended up going to Dragonsteel because we had done a collaboration with the guys from Tudor Ramble, if you're familiar with
Yeah, yeah.
them. And I reached out to them and said, hey, do you guys have a contact for Dragonsteel? And it kind of went off to the races from there. And so then I kind of got in the airplane on my own and was like the new kid at camp. And here we are now.
Well, it's great to have you in the Cosmere community.
Thank you. And I mean, the most rewarding thing has been is, I mean, I think for you guys, it's like, we all live busy lives, but we prioritize this stuff. I mean, you guys have been doing the show for so long,
Yeah.
but you guys make it a priority because you love sharing these stories with people.
Yeah.
And for me, every time that I get a comment from somebody saying, oh my gosh, I've just finished Mistborn, I can't wait to start Well of Ascension, or even better, when people say, my husband and I read Mistborn together because of your podcast. Like,
Aw.
that makes all of it worth it. It doesn't matter how long it takes to research or prepare for the show. Like,
Yeah.
if I just get to be a part of sharing these stories with people, like, it's all worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. How did your experience at Nexus compare to like other conventions?
Yeah.
Whether that's like other book kind of fantasy conventions, or I don't know if there are like podcasting specific conventions,
Yeah.
but just like what are kind of the differences there and how did your experience compare?
Well, first of all, I've been to podcast conventions and they're a lot lamer
Yeah, I
than
bet.
the
As
fantasy
soon as I
conventions
said it,
we
I was
go
like, that
to.
sounds terrible.
So I would say that Dragonsteel really blew me away just from the sheer size of it. I was speaking with one of the employees at Dragonsteel, and they mentioned that they had 10,000 people in there every single day.
Yeah.
And it was just much larger than any other convention we had been to. And that was a real perspective shifting moment for me, just because when you are in your room reading Mistborn or the Stormlight Archive, people love this work, but it's all abstract. So
Of
being
Yeah.
able
course.
to be in that same place with 10,000 people who are all just as passionate about this one thing as you are, it really kind of changed in my mind the footprint that I thought that these stories had in kind
Yeah.
of the fantasy zeitgeist. So it was really, really interesting to be there.
Yeah, yeah, that is one thing that's so cool because reading is such a individual thing.
Yeah.
Like you said, you're just sort of sitting in your house reading reading this book, and
Yeah.
maybe you have, one or two people in your life that you can like talk about books with or talk about fantasy with, but then to be in a space with literally thousands of people who are all in love with the same people that you love that are real to me but are fictional people is just so magical.
Yeah.
It does capture something really essential about the fandom because I think anytime that you're reading, you're co-creating a world with the author, right? The
Mhm.
author is writing something and your mind is kind of like building it out. And if those moments that happen during a story are impactful to you and meaningful to you, something happens and we'll say, Mistborn 1 to try to prevent as much spoilers as
Yeah,
possible.
there you go. You're good.
I think that, if you're having a relationship and a connection to Vin and Kelsier's story,
Yeah.
then that kind of lives only inside of you
Hmm.
until you have an outlet.
Mhm.
And to know when you're at Dragonsteel Nexus or you're surrounded by people that experience that same thing, like you were talking about how Kaladin is your favorite character. Again, we're not going to spoil things, but like there's a reason for that. There's aspects of Kaladin that you connect with. If you started talking about those reasons that you like Kaladin so much, I would start to feel the same aspects, the same things. And I think that that's true for so many people who are at Nexus. One thing that Brandon talked about was the Next Step Coin initiative. And it was really impactful to so many in the community because it's just like, of course, I was feeling this. Like I was thinking and like relating to this. And then Brandon's taking action that he's, of course, writing about in his stories. And it's just like a multitude or a network of connections that is causing like an amplifying effect. That's the best way I've found to describe it. And so, yeah, we're really happy that the environment and the community around Nexus has continued to grow over these years. And what I want to talk about today is how you see and like introduce people to the Cosmere, because you were introduced in the last like 5 years. And primarily what you are doing with Fantasy Fan Fellas is introducing people who are readers, are passionate about maybe other projects that the Fantasy Fan Girls covered, but you're bringing them into the Cosmere.
Yeah, I think one of the things about Nexus is how open and welcoming it is in creating community. And not 2025, but 2024, in Sanderson's speech, he was really talking about the importance of welcoming new readers in and like not gatekeeping and maintaining this really warm and open sense of community. And all of his work is really about empathy and trying to understand people who might have different preferences than you do or different life experiences than you do. And I think that that's something that fantasy in general does really well. And so today, I think this is a great jumping off point for us to kind of talk about why read fantasy at all. Because I'm sure as a fantasy fan, we've all had these moments when you're at a party or whatever and you get talking to someone about how you enjoy reading, they enjoy reading, and you're like, oh my gosh, great. Like, what have you been reading recently? And they say something like, I'm reading a book about climate change and rice paddies in Vietnam. And you're like, oh, cool. I'm reading this book about this girl who was like the heir to a kingdom, and then the kingdom got burned down, and then she's like in hiding, but then she gets drafted into this like competition by her arch enemy, but he doesn't know that it's her. And then there's also kind of an enemies to
And he's
lovers.
so hot too.
But it's
so
really
hot.
about politics, and they're just staring at you, and you're just like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll see myself out now.
Oh, by the way, it has a really intricate magic system that's based on gravitational principles. So I'm sure that you can relate.
Or like, this is a real story. I was at a party over the holidays and talking about reading, and the person I was talking to was like, you know, I really like reading books about like cliff divers and like whatever, free jumpers, whatever.
Sure.
I don't know what
Yeah,
you know,
rock
those
climbers and-
things.
yeah.
He's like, because you know, it's really intense. There's a lot of adventure, but it's real, so it's even cooler, right? Like this idea that something being imaginary automatically makes it less than
Mhm.
is
Yeah.
something that I think we encounter a lot. And I know that we've set this episode up as an in defense of. I imagine most of our audience probably doesn't actually
Preaching to the choir,
need to
baby.
be convinced. So I would love to frame this more as like a toolkit for like how to maybe think about or explain fantasy to people in those circumstances when they're like, why would you read fantasy? Like, how are you, the audience, going to sort of explain this to folks who maybe haven't seen the light yet?
Yeah, I mean, to me, all I can really speak to is my experience with fantasy. And in a time where, not to get into specifics, but things can be very difficult just existing in this world, I had a conversation with Pierce Brown in one of our episodes, and he mentioned that he believes that if we instead of starting a class, a US history class, with a US history textbook, we started with a historical fiction book about US history that students would be more engaged and
Yeah.
they understand the broader scope of what they're actually talking about as opposed to memorizing facts. And I think that resonates so truly for me. To me, fantasy stories are not real, but they are instructive of how we should approach various things that might happen in our life.
Hmm.
Um, they are a way for us to talk about the things that are too difficult to talk about in clear ways while still getting to the truth of universal things that everybody deals with. Like when I mentioned with Kaladin, right? I haven't dealt with some of the things that he has dealt with in these books. However, if I ever do, he will be instructive to me. He will
Hmm.
help me get through those things.
Right.
And there's a certain level of reality that you kind of build as you're going through these stories, and these characters become real to us. And so to me, it's almost one of those things where you just can't get it until you do it. You can't
Yeah.
get it until you experience it. And there's a reason why why Lord of the Rings is still so relevant today. Why the speech that Sam gives to Frodo at the end of the Two Towers is constantly thought of. I see it on my
Yeah,
Instagram all the time. I go through
Yeah.
my Insta reels and it's Sam just saying this speech over and over again. And you know what? I
Because
almost
it's
cry.
so good.
of
Yeah.
course. Yeah.
So good. But these stories are worth taking the time to interact with because they will help you not only go through the world in a more informed way, but they'll also help you to understand yourself more deeply.
Yeah, absolutely. I think also there's a little bit of a misunderstanding in like how broad fantasy really is, in
Yeah.
that it really encompasses kind of everything else. And Brandon Sanderson has some quotes about this of like he can do all of the things that other authors do, and he can have dragons.
Hmm.
Because like fantasy really, right? You can have a mystery fantasy or a romantasy or a historical fantasy. Like you can have every other genre and fantasy at the same
Yeah.
time. And really, any type of story that is involving something that doesn't exist in here and now
Mhm.
is fantasy.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of times when people think fantasy, they're thinking a very specific type of fantasy,
Right.
Right.
not necessarily realizing that they've probably read something that could be considered fantasy and like they don't even know it yet. There's so many even like classic literature that people would say, "Oh, this is, so much better than fantasy in terms
Yeah.
of literary value." Things like a 100 Years of Solitude, Animal Farm, right? There's a bunch of talking animals. Like
Yeah.
that's fantasy. 1984 being a really speculative look at what a world might be like. The Picture of Dorian Gray
Just having
is
straight up magic.
yeah, exactly. Like straight up magic that are like put on this weird other pedestal. And I think we just need to break down those walls and say there's way more fantasy that everyone is intaking really on a much more regular basis. Even like pop culture with our superheroes, Marvel movies, like that's fantasy. What is
Yeah.
Kaladin if not Superman,
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. I think that that's a good point, that kind of like the concept of what is fantasy, because there's the divide fiction and nonfiction. You were talking a little bit about that. That person at the Christmas party was like, I like nonfiction because it's real and it's intense and whatever, because they're rock climbing something. But the divide to fiction simply means that like it's not real. It didn't actually happen, or it can't actually happen. But I think that encompasses a bunch of things, like author that we both read a lot, John Green. And, he started writing a lot of fiction
Mhm.
based in the real world. So it's like The
Yeah,
Fault in Our
literary
Stars.
fiction.
Exactly. It's like
Mhm.
a girl in our world who has cancer and is dealing things that a teenage girl with cancer is dealing with,
Mhm.
compared to anything that introduces magic. And that also includes magical technology. Like, I think
Mm.
that the connection between sci-fi and fantasy is, basically irrelevant for the most part. It's just like
Yeah.
the future versus kind of past inspirations, where sci-fi is like, well, there's technology that allows Star Wars, for the, example, be like, you jump into your hyperspace and you travel across the galaxy and there's a laser sword that can cut through anything. Like that's just magical technology.
Yeah.
And Brandon has floated, for those who are starting at Mistborn, which is very much geared towards like the past. Brandon's floated concepts about moving that into the future of the Cosmere and blending where we are now with something more sci-fi inspired. But what I think is so great, and what you mentioned, Hayden, is that when it comes to building or creating the world that doesn't exist in your own mind, I think it actually makes it more meaningful and more
Mm.
impactful. Because to say, I'm just going to go back to this example that you used, the rock climber, that is intense. And like the training and the story, and like then you're up there by yourself and you're, rain or something, it's like dangerous. All of that stuff is very cool and it's very intense. But the fact that it is real, to me, is actually how it's limiting.
Yeah.
Where something that is completely fantastical, it's just make believe. It only exists for that author writing and then you as the reader. And when you create something meaningful and real out of something that is fictional, it's actually
A magic trick in itself.
yeah, right. You did a magic trick with yourself, or the author
Yeah.
and you performed a magic trick.
I think that's also one of the coolest things about Nexus is that from this fictional world, it becomes something real and tangible, which I think is what you were speaking to earlier, Hayden, about this like wild transition of having this thing that is being, just read by yourself in your room and exists inside your brain, then suddenly be something real that
The
you
World
can.
Hopper Ball. I mean,
Oh my gosh.
literally. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's peak.
Yeah.
I was doing some research before this episode. I wanted to see what other people had to say about like why reading fantasy is important. And I think, Tyler, you touched on this idea that in a fantasy world, the author can design the entire environment of the story to suit the themes that they're trying to get across in a way that's a little bit more pure or streamlined than maybe you can in a story that is grounded in our world, where kind of everything comes with a lot of baggage and readers might already have attachments and ideas about certain things. And so trying to convey a message or a theme can be bogged down a little bit. Whereas if
Mm.
you take us completely out of this world where you
Mhm.
can't have any preconceived notions other than the ones that the author has given you, it's a little bit more of an efficient like pathway to really delivering some of those universal truths.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's to that point again of you are able to discuss things that would have, to your point, too much baggage otherwise in a normal world. Like if let's say we set a literary fiction novel in New York right now, you start thinking about the political systems that are in place in America. You start
Right.
thinking about like, oh, like where are they in New York? There's all these different preconceived notions that you already have about the real world. Whereas with this, you're able to strip all of that away and really be able to talk. It's kind of like, in a way, like comedy. You know how comedians say
Sure.
that like
Yeah.
they can be the quote truth tellers of society, as pretentious as that might sound, but they're able to explore different themes that you might not be able to if you were going by the rules of certain other social circumstances.
Right.
It's the same thing for fantasy. If we live in an entirely different world, we can talk about the injustices and evils of our world, but it can be done in a way that is much more weirdly accessible to someone than if we were to be pointing the finger directly at that exact thing.
Yeah.
Right. And you
Absolutely.
can explore more deeply the why behind all of the motivations of the characters. So let's talk about Lord of the Rings a little bit. You're a man of a certain age, so I'm guessing that you watched the movies kind of growing up, and those were probably impactful. But I think that one of the things that fantasy is able to do in that situation is it strips it down to a very binary sense. Sauron and Saruman are
Mm.
evil and the fellowship and every, race around them is good, and they are fighting good versus evil. And you know that Frodo is going to continue on his quest to destroy the ring. And when it happens, there's the catharsis of, yes, good triumphed over evil. And then someone like George R. R. Martin, or really any author who comes after that first generation of fantasy, they're playing with different concepts. The political nature. Okay, yeah, we're going to blend the War of the Roses from English history with the fantasy world. And so you're going to get a little bit of the political machinations and Machiavelli, and maybe Ned Stark isn't such a good guy, because if he was a good guy, he would have, challenged authority in a certain way that he didn't, and he ended up dead in the first book. Sorry for spoilers for that series that's 25 years old. But I think that what fantasy is able to do is strip away. I like this idea of like a good comedian telling a powerful joke is they are saying something true, they're reflecting something true about the world, but they are reframing it and recontextualizing it and then delivering it with a punchline in such a way that it hits really hard. And it might make you say like, oh, I knew that, but I had never heard someone say it like that before.
Yeah.
And I think that's what is so powerful about fantasy, is just like, I know that good is good and evil is evil, but
Yeah.
what does that mean? I need the example of Sam carrying Frodo, and
Yeah.
like, I can't carry the ring, but I'm going to carry you.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
how a hero behaves. And that's kind
Yeah.
of like the difference that fantasy is able to deliver in really clear ways. And I think it's what we're all talking about.
I want to illustrate this point as well with a personal story. So, when the other thing that I think fantasy is really special at doing is instilling empathy and
Mhm.
Yes.
developing that muscle within your brain to understand the experiences of other people besides your own. So, when I first watched Lord of the Rings when I was, I think, 8 or 9 years old, my sister introduced me to it. I thought Fellowship of the Ring was so boring. I just could not. Way too much walking around, and I was
Mhm.
good. And then one day I walked into the game room and my sister was watching the last like 45 minutes of Return of the King. I was like, oh, I guess I'll just like kind of watch the end with her. Frodo gets, attacked by the spider, and, everything, the ring gets destroyed, blah, blah, blah. And then the end of the movie where he says goodbye to all of these friends that he's made along the way. And then he says goodbye to Sam and he goes off into the West.
Mhm.
Anybody who remembers Into the West as the final song in the credits of Return of the King will remember this. I genuinely do not remember the last time I cried that hard. And I was so bored by the story initially, but somehow those last 45 minutes of that movie gripped me so much that genuinely I think it helped instilled a level of empathy in me as I went through my childhood that I don't know if I would have had I not seen it. And like, that is one of my core memories of childhood, crying to the stupid end of this movie. And then from there, I was obsessed with Lord of the Rings. And so I think that reading these stories can instill empathy into anyone, adults as well, but especially young children.
Yeah.
Like, it tells you like how to move through life as a better person, and that's the only way you can do that is by just seeing things through other people's eyes. It's funny as you look back how instructive fake stories have been on in molding us into who we are today.
Oh, yeah. I mean, telling stories is like quite literally maybe the most ancient and like most human thing
Yeah,
possible.
yeah,
Like what were we doing when we didn't have technology and we were just sitting around a fire in the middle of winter? Like
Yeah.
yeah.
we weren't talking about how we went to pick berries this morning. Like, how boring is that?
No, not
Like
at all.
we weren't trying to rehash the last time we killed a deer. We
Yeah.
were making stuff up.
Yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Of course. And I think if we look at what is universally understood to be the best or most wide read pieces of literature, they're religious texts, right?
Mm.
The Bible,
Mhm.
the Bhagavad Gita, a bunch of
Yeah.
religious texts that
Which
I don't
are
know the names
all,
of, but they're
for the most part, told through parables
Parable
or stories
Yes,
that didn't
100%.
actually happen in order to make a point.
Right, exactly. It's just like the story of Noah and the ark. It's like, is that a truthful retelling of a specific event that happened and occurred with a guy named Noah? Or is it a story about what is necessary to like survive in difficult situations, and like how the world developed, and like how we are all connected in a very deep way of like,
Mhm.
oh, the, God wiped out everything, but it's okay because Noah like had all the animals, and like that story is also repeated in a bunch of different cultures, have like flood origin
Yeah.
myths.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that those, like, we call them myths at a certain point when we're talking about the Greek gods or the Romans, but they really are just fantasy.
Mm.
And I think this is a great defense of fantasy. I want to get a little more difficult though, because
We're gonna put you in the hot seat, Hayden.
this is
Can't
also
wait.
your specialty. And the fantasy fangirls, as you said, kind of started around Fourth Wing, and
Mhm.
a genre that I do not think is uncommon or hasn't existed previously, but definitely has
It's having
exploded.
its time in the sun.
Yeah,
Oh,
a
for
lot
sure.
of
Romantasy.
romantasy. And so give us kind of the same in defense of romantasy. You have produced hundreds of episodes. How
At this
long?
point,
Yeah,
probably, yeah,
exactly.
hundreds
So,
or
and they're
something.
almost entirely about different works in the romantasy genre.
Mhm.
So tell me, someone who I would say is lightly affiliated or lightly experienced with romantasy, why it's valuable in the same way that we just talked about with fantasy in general.
Yeah. What is so interesting about romantasy to me, especially as a man, like I go through life finding it really hard to connect with other men. Like I think a
Mm,
lot of the issues surrounding men these days is like relational. We just don't
yeah.
know how to relate to each other and like talk to each other without doing something. I heard this really interesting like study that found that women really thrive like having a quality time together facing each other, whereas men they thrive sitting beside each other, not directly facing each other. And so all that to say, it's like sometimes men just don't know how to connect with people, and that's just like a fact of the matter. And looking at romantasy, I mean, listen, there's some very very rich worlds in this genre. There's a ton of lore. Looking at something like Throne of Glass by Sarah J Maas, Akatar, Rebecca Yarros isn't even done with what she's doing with Empyrean. These are very lore heavy worlds. However, at the crux of it, so much of it just comes down to relationships with other people. That might extend to romantic relationships, but the found family trope is so strong within romantasy. It's about
Mm.
finding your people, making friends that you will keep for the rest of your life. And so I kind of feel like romantasy has the whole empathy thing that we were talking about, but on like hard drive mode. Like it is like that is the crux of romantasy, is like understanding each other, being in relationship with one another, whether that's romance or through friendship, or family as well. And I think that there has been this belief among people from the beginning of the romance novel art form. I mean, think about there was one woman, I think she was my theater teacher or something. She said that her mother used to read those dime romance novels.
Right,
Uh-huh.
right.
My
And
grandma had this whole shelf of like
oh, for
Danielle
sure.
Steele
Yes.
romances.
And apparently her mom would call them bosom heavers because they just like got your heart rate up or something
That's
like
so
that.
funny.
I know, it's so funny. And but I think that people still have this outdated perception of what romance can be in the novel form. And I think just like Lord of the Rings, just like the Stormlight Archive and all of Brandon's works, these are speaking to a fundamental truth that is it's the same fundamental truth, but it might be told in a different instrument, right? We might be playing with a violin as opposed to like a flute or something like that. And so, and it's been hard too, right? Brandon's speech at 2024 Dragonsteel Nexus was a really, really big deal to the romantasy community because he said, listen, think about all the times that as a community we've been told that our stuff is not good enough or it's
Yeah.
not real art.
Yeah.
Well, we're doing that very same thing to romantasy people. And That's not cool. And
Yeah.
so, at the end of the day, there's so many books out there to read. If you don't want to touch Romantasy, guess what? You're not going to run
No
out of
one's gonna make you.
yeah, you're good. So, to me, I just think that I would just hope people would give Romantasy a chance at least. And I think there's plenty of merit behind these works, just like there is with any of the stuff that, we talk about on our own shows.
That is such a great explanation. I've never heard romantasy framed as like being centered around relationship. I think that's such
Yeah.
a beautiful and like really effective way of describing kind of the split between fantasy and romantasy, even
Mhm.
though it's like kind of right there in the name, you know?
Yeah.
But I think especially nowadays, romantasy is so often framed through a lens of like really intense sexuality,
Uh-huh.
and that is being like emphasized so much in this moment. I think just because it's the most salient, attention grabbing
It does
Mhm.
part
sell.
of it, I mean, yeah, sex sells. That honestly, like you're like making me think about romantasy
Yeah.
differently and like feel a little bit more open to exploring the genre.
Yeah, on the point of intimacy, that's the other, criticism that Romantasy gets is that it's all smut. Like, there's a book, Heat of the Everflame, and then Burn of the Everflame is going to be coming out sometime soon. We're not sure when, but these books are 1,000 pages long,
Right.
and the intimacy scenes are maybe 10, 20 pages of that, and so that's not all that these books are. And I would say as well, sex is a part of life.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Very true.
That
Yeah.
I know that we are a Brandon Sanderson, loving podcast, but the thing is that it is a part of everyone's life in some way, shape, or form. And desire, everyone has desire. Everybody
Mhm.
has wants. And the thing is there's a lot of different ways that you can write intimacy.
Mhm.
I've been noodling on some writing myself, and I've asked myself, do I want to write intimacy into my stories? And I think the answer is yes, because they're not just something that sells your book. Intimacy can be something that drives the plot forward, that drives your characters forward. Because I don't know about you guys, but the moments of intimacy in my life, especially when I was younger, were very instructive for
Yeah,
Yeah.
me as a
yeah.
person. So I think that the smut argument, which you weren't making, by the way, Brooke, is not doesn't carry much weight if you actually analyze these stories a little bit more deeply.
I agree. I think that the way that you actually framed the concept that like men want to perform a task together.
Yeah.
There's like a funny meme where it's like, I'm a man, I want to go to war. But when it comes back to Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship has a task, right?
Yeah.
And it's a bunch of men who
Mhm.
are trying to accomplish a task together. And they do that and they form a fellowship. A romantasy version of Lord of the Rings wouldn't necessarily remove the ring or Sauron or Saruman or the orcs or
Mhm.
like any of that from the story. It would simply drive the motivations on the relationships between the fellowship. Like,
Yeah.
what is Frodo and Boromir explored, a little bit in the first book and the first movie, but like that could be a significantly larger percentage of the storytelling.
Yeah.
And it's like, yes, we are on a quest, but how we are going to accomplish or fail at that quest is going to
Yeah.
be based on our relationships between these people. And
Yeah.
one of the criticisms of the Lord of the Rings movies, and it's mimicked in the books as well, is that someone like Legolas has one line of dialogue and it happens in the third book to Frodo, but like they don't know each other. Like
Whoa.
they're not friends. They're not
Yeah.
in any
Yeah.
type of deep
Yeah.
Mhm.
connective relationship because they've
Mhm.
never talked to each other. And so
Mhm.
all romantasy would do would kind of like flip that around and say like, why is a several hundred, if not couple thousand-year-old elf, I forgot Legolas's exact age, but like, why is he on this current task with a 50-year-old hobbit and
Yeah.
a wizard who is also kind of an angel? Like, what are all of those aspects? And I feel like it would be, I don't know if it's copyrightable, but it would be very interesting to see one of these big authors kind of like do a practice run of
Yeah.
rewriting a Lord of the Rings, but with the romantasy element.
That would be pretty interesting.
Because I feel like you would achieve the same thing. You would exist in the
Right.
same world, but it would drive the story in different ways because of the relationships with the characters.
And I don't think that either one of those would necessarily be like better or worse, you know, having it be
Of
like
course.
plot driven or relationship driven. And certainly those two things can exist in the same work together. I think that as we're talking about fantasy and then more specifically romantasy, the thing for all of us to remember is that there are so many authors writing in so many different ways, even within genre,
Oh my
that
gosh.
like the idea that there is not going to be any romantasy that you like
Right.
is
I
just preposterous.
not to interrupt you, but the variance within romantasy as a subgenre is unbelievable. There is literally something for everyone. And to like I think there's a lot of opportunities for gateway books for people
Mhm.
who are more into I think that I hate this word, but like traditional
Sure,
fantasy.
sure.
Sure.
Like something like Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. It's like, oh, if you loved Game of Thrones, if you loved Stormlight Archive, this is kind of Sarah J. Maas's magnum opus where she's building this huge sprawling world. And certainly there's the other typical tropes that you might see in romantasy as well. But it also feels very much like a traditional fantasy in so many ways. Like the amount of variety is unbelievable. And by the way, the amount of new authors who are getting opportunities because of romantasy, there are so many published authors
And
who
readers.
yes,
Like
yes.
it even though I am not a romantasy reader, like I don't need a lot of romance in my books in
Mhm.
general. It has been so wonderful to see people be excited about reading.
Right.
Oh yeah,
People who, you know, maybe haven't read for fun since they were a kid, to
of
see
course.
people reading fantasy again, being excited to talk about it
Mhm.
publicly, seeing people with their highlighters and their page flags, like really excited to engage with a text.
We love nerds
Like,
Yeah,
here. That's
yeah,
what we're
I
saying.
mean,
yeah.
this like renaissance in the romantasy space, I think has been so exciting and refreshing, even though it's not something that I necessarily am like super into.
Yeah. Well, and I think of someone like Hannah Nicole Mara. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. She wrote The Assistant to the Villain series, or she's writing it currently. She's still working on it. I believe that that whole idea started from TikTok skits that she did.
Whoa.
And I can't remember if she had done any writing before, if she had published a book before that, but I mean, it's this best-selling series now, and it all came from this place of like you think of someone coming up with an idea for a story and they have the candle on at their desk or writing in ink and quill,
Yeah.
but this just came from someone saying, I have this idea. What would happen if I leaned into my imagination?
Yeah.
And turns out people love it. I mean, it's so much fun. It's so interesting, and I really think it's this place where anybody can write anything, and
Yeah.
there's an audience for it. It really the limit is your own imagination.
Yeah.
Certainly think that it has been a boon to reading in general and a real boon to fantasy readers. I'm very excited for anyone's kind of like gateway to all of those benefits that we talked about, empathy and like creating story worlds and bringing us all the way back to Nexus, like finding communities
Yeah.
around and like passionate people around those things. And I believe that we will only see more growth in the romantasy subgenre. At a certain point, like I feel like it is just fantasy
Yeah.
in a way,
Yeah,
but
it
Yeah.
is. You're right.
and
Yeah.
so like I don't know how much longer there will be like this hard definition, especially because it's very difficult for someone like Sanderson to exist when you're not exploring, as you pointed out, Hayden, a kind of key part of people's motivations, which is intimacy. And
Mhm.
just like how many bad decisions have we made because we were in a relationship? How many great decisions, or like I went beyond what I thought I was capable of, did you make because you wanted to impress a girl, or you wanted
Yeah.
to follow your lover across the country or something like that? In a fantasy world, that just becomes like, I'm gonna go hunt down a dragon, or I'm gonna become a dragon rider or something like that. And it's like the motivations are a key part of what it means to be human. And so it's strange in a lot of ways to try to divorce that aspect of humanity from story. And I think that there's like an honesty to the romantasy space that is like injecting that back into the fantasy
Mm,
world.
mm,
Hmm.
And
mm.
that's been really nice to see. And I think we'll continue to see that. Unless you have any closing thoughts on romantasy, I want to set up our slight barrier.
I have one last one. In case somehow Brandon sees this episode, I want to be
He's
clear.
a big fan, so yeah.
Warbreaker is a very sexy book.
Oh,
Okay.
yes,
And
of course.
I have never been more angry at Brandon than when he closed the door when Susabron and what's the
Siri.
and Siri. I mean, I have never wanted to see two people get it on more
Yeah.
in my entire life, and I was robbed of that opportunity. So it's in there for him. It's in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think while there is not explicit sexual material on page in Sanderson's work, I don't feel like sexuality and relationship is, entirely
No,
disregarded. There are so
totally
many
agree.
really passionate relationships on the page that
Yeah.
are still really compelling.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely agree. Thank you so much for this in defense of romantasy section, and to any of the listeners that have not been familiar with Cosmere Conversations, this is your warning. This is your changeover to an unleashed Hayden, a full spoiler Hayden.
Hayden Unbounded. Yeah.
Exactly. And that reference is a spoiler in itself, because we are now going to talk about the Cosmere in full, and specifically continuing this in defense of, I want us to defend Wind and Truth. Wind and Truth is the best.
It is the most recent Stormlight Archive book, which I do think that there's a little bit of recency bias in terms of some of the backlash that the book has received in the last year since it's been out. And I would love to just like have a little bit of a conversation about what concerns are maybe valid, or why is Wind and Truth actually really great and everyone is complaining about nothing.
So I would love to preface this with my experience with Wind and Truth. So I started reading Mistborn in I think it was July of 2024, something like that. And so I have been making my way through the Cosmere. I tend to take a month or two break in between each Stormlight Archive book just because they're so
Good
long.
call. Yeah.
Sure.
Yep. And so I was working my way through Rhythm of War, and then I got this opportunity to be on this panel with you guys. And it was, guess what? A spoilers Wind and Truth panel. And I said, oh my God, I have got to get going here. So I listened to Wind and Truth over the course of a week at 3 times speed.
Nice.
Oh my gosh.
And so you guys, I am not lying when there were moments during that panel that I literally thought to myself, I do not remember this part at all. Honestly, I probably should not have been on that panel, to be honest with you.
No, you are a wonderful addition to the panel.
That is totally fair because Wind and Truth is so dense.
So dense.
I just finished my third reread,
Uh-huh.
and it wasn't until the third time that I felt like, okay, I feel
Yeah.
like I actually got everything.
Totally. And so what I did was I had the panel, and I still felt pretty good about like the theory that I presented, but I finished the new year and I said, okay, I really want to go back through Wind and Truth and re-experience it. And so I listened through it recently at a normal speed, and I was really surprised by just how differently it struck me, and the way that it climbed up my Stormlight Archive rankings,
Yeah.
which we'll get into later. I think also too, there was an element of, it was released in December of 2024. I didn't read it until like October of 2025. I had 10 months of external feedback saying, oh, this is the weakest Stormlight Archive book.
Sure.
There's this problem, this issue, this issue, this issue. And I almost think my first read through was a little bit colored by that. And so I almost felt like reading through it a second time, I was reading an entirely different book.
Yeah. It's so funny because people said the exact same thing when Rhythm of War came out.
Mm.
Oh, this is the weakest one. This is the weakest one. This one's so bad, blah, blah, blah. And it's just, I think we love this story so much that it's really hard, I think, sometimes to get past our preconceived expectations for what
Mhm.
something might be, especially for the super nerds who are making a lot of theories and predictions and whatnot, when your personal theories or like the things that you've convinced yourself are absolutely correct, because you've done all the research and obviously this person is exactly like this and therefore it's going to work out this way, that there is like kind of an adjustment period where
Yeah.
reality has to reline up with your expectations.
I think there was a large portion of the fan base that this was the first Stormlight Archive book that they were reading at release. I think there are
Oh,
so many people who got to read 1, 2, 3, and 4 immediately. And so
yeah.
this was the first time where they had the anticipation of waiting for release. And then when you combine it with the fact that a lot of people treat this book as if it's the end of the series,
That's the biggest thing
Yes.
to me.
even though
Yes.
it's the end of the arc. And I do think that no matter what Brandon would have done, there's a real challenge to writing this book, because you
Yes.
do have to wrap up some things and keep so many things left open. So I think the anticipation combined with the fact that they didn't have the payoff that they were quite anticipating, I think it fairly left a bad taste in some people's mouth. But I do hope that as people get some distance from it and perhaps visit it again, I think some people will be really surprised.
Thinking about it as a middle book, and
Yeah.
like it really is the middlest of all middle
Literally.
books, I think makes way more sense in exactly what you're talking about, that some things are resolved, but there are still so many threads that are
Yeah.
open because they're setting up new things and it is acting as this bridge to
Yeah.
the next part of the story.
I think that that's probably the biggest misunderstood expectation. And it's a fair one coming into Wind and Truth. I think you and I had many conversations about saying, like, okay, Sanderson's going to release Wind and Truth, and then it's going to be 10 plus years
Mm,
before we get Stormlight Archive 6. And if there's going to be a decade or more, then it kind of should be a conclusion
yeah, yeah,
to a
yeah.
lot of the story
I
arcs
definitely thought that there were going to be more storylines more neatly
wrapped up.
wrapped up
Mhm,
Right.
mhm.
than there were. We had a lot of these conversations before the book came out where I was like, I think we're going to know everything there is to know about Biota Mishram by the end of Wind and Truth. And like,
Mhm.
that's going to be
Oh boy.
resolved. And then, yeah, we basically learned nothing new.
100%. And I think that maybe there could have been a different focus from Brandon in terms of preparing the audience, but it's not really his job to like prepare the audience or like set
He
Yeah.
did.
expectations.
He's talked about how
He wanted to
he kind of saw what the
vibe
what
was.
the vibe was
Yeah.
before the book came out, and a few months before he started trying to like reset expectations.
Exactly. But it could have
Mm,
been, maybe it could have been done in a different way. But to me, that is the biggest mistake going into Wind and Truth is thinking that it's going to be the Return of the King
yeah,
when it's actually the Two Towers.
right.
And Brandon talked about this, writing Adolin in Azamir and the battle sequences there was a lot like Helm's Deep.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that kind of in that writing places it for me very clearly in this is the middle. And once
Mhm.
you reframe it as this is the middle, then so many of the what people labeled as like structural problems to me aren't problems. They are exactly where we should be in the middle of the book. One of the criticisms that people were labeling is like, well, everyone's on their own separate track and they're
Yeah.
not
Yeah,
working together. There's
yeah.
Dalinar's story and Shallan's story and Adolin's story and Kaladin and Seth's story. And then you have Venli's story, and Venli's story is just like weirdly thrown in, but like we don't learn enough. And then there's all this like spiritual realm mumbo jumbo that I didn't really understand. And so
Mhm.
there's like 8 different
Read it
things.
again, my friend. That's my response to
One more
that.
time, or listen to a podcast called Cosmere Conversations where we cover all the fun stuff. But I think if that's the end of your story, that's a very bad end of the story. The end of the story shouldn't have everyone being on separate tracks, but it's
Right.
not the end, it's the middle. And if it's the middle of the story, then you do want the spread and then eventually the recombining and like how those stories all interweave back together.
I mean, I do think in terms of structural issues, the 10-day situation does hurt the character development. And there's not really anything that Sanderson could have done about that after he already set it up. But I do think that structurally is probably the weakest part in just trying to have these characters undergo a lot of character growth and get a lot of information and travel a lot of distance in only 10 days does feel a little bit rushed and unrealistic at certain points. But that's really my biggest criticism. I think overall, the substance of what happens, I'm pretty happy with.
I wasn't bothered by the 10 days, my second read through actually. I believe that there may, I don't want to speak for folks, but I think that some people may have had issues with the structure and just overall the first 2 days where there was the setup of, okay, we're going to go into the spiritual realm. There's a lot of inner dialogue about like I believe Kaladin had a lot of reckoning with his depression
Yeah,
and like figuring his stuff out. I think that Shalon had a lot of that as well in the
a
first few
lot.
days. To me, the last 4 to 5 days are like a 500-page Sanderlanche,
Yeah,
Oh
basically.
my
for
gosh.
sure.
And so
Yeah.
I think that there's some valid criticism of the beginning of the book, but unfortunately, again, I'm putting myself in the head of someone who was waiting for this and then picked it up on release day, and they're like, the first 200 pages, I'm really not feeling. So in order for me to enjoy the rest of this book, the last, what would that be?
Yeah, 800
800,
plus.
10, 1,000 pages have to carry a lot more weight. It's like kind of going uphill. And
Mm.
so I feel like perhaps the rest of the book didn't quite overcome the beginning for some folks.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say exactly what, everyone's breaking point was or kind of like
Yeah.
their fall off point, but I think that what could potentially be the case with Wind and Truth is reflected in a maybe still crazy concept or theory. I'm wondering, Hayden, have you heard about the Katek nature of the titles of Stormlight Archive?
No.
Okay. So very briefly,
Well, in world, right, there's a poem form called a katek, which is a palindrome, but like the whole poem is
Oh.
the same forward and backwards.
Oh, okay.
now up until Rhythm of War, the initialisms of the book titles were making a katek.
So
So
you
it's
had WOK for Way of
With Kings,
Kings,
Words of Radiance,
Oathbringer.
Oathbringer, OB, and
No,
then
just O.
just O,
Yeah.
excuse me, yes. And then Rhythm
Rhythm
of
of
War is
War,
the
okay.
reverse of Words of Radiance. And so it was mimicking, right? And
Okay.
then everyone was thinking going into the naming of Wind and Truth that it would be Knights of Wind and Truth,
So it would be KOW is what we were looking for. The
Which is the
reverse
name of the
Way of
actual book
Kings.
too.
which is the name of the
Yes.
actual book. But Brandon's publishers wouldn't
They
allow.
didn't want that to be the title.
They were just like, this does
Oh.
not. No, it's going to be Wind and Truth. But he wanted to call it Knights of Wind and Truth. It would create a katek with the initialisms of the title. Now, the crazy theory part is that it is still going to be a katek, but through 10 total books. Once
Okay.
again, we are in the middle, not at the end
Yeah.
of the katek.
The katek is still possible. I hold out hope.
And so, but that kind of like that idea, I think, is just how I perceive Wind and Truth is just like you might understand it very differently and feel very differently about Wind and Truth
Oh
when
yeah.
you have 10 books total of the Stormlight Archive.
I would
Yeah.
love for us to all share like what was your favorite part of Wind and Truth, or like what is something about Wind and Truth that you love? Like, what's your argument for why is Wind and Truth the best actually?
Okay.
So for me, there's a few parts that come to mind, and they truly are. I mean, they are really sticking with me out of the second reread. Similarly to the Sanderlanches of Words of Radiance and Oathbringer, but the final stand at Azimir, where
Yeah.
Adolin calls the
So
unoathed
good.
Oh my God. I mean, that really took Adel to a different level for me as a character, and his
100.
whole journey through Wind and Truth, not understanding where he lies in this new reality of being the best swordsman and now being, in his eyes, virtually useless. And then he loses his leg.
Yeah.
He's and he works through that, and then the unoath happens, and my theory that I posited on our panel was about Adolin. So I think there's some really interesting stuff coming for him in the
So
second arc.
much
Yeah.
interesting stuff. Yeah, we just recorded our Adolin episode yesterday, so we are
Oh, great.
fresh
Yeah.
on like
Oh,
how
I can't wait to
awesome
listen.
Adolin is.
Yeah, it's gonna
Nice.
come out the episode prior to your episode release.
Okay, great. So and then just ultimately Kaladin becoming a herald and being dubbed the herald of second chances. I mean, it was really incredible to read through that moment again. So I mean, those are the moments that really stick with me. I loved Syl throughout this entire book, really getting to see her actualize into
Mm-hmm.
this living, breathing character who feels more and more human every single page. So, I mean, there's just some really great moments. And I mean, and to be honest with you, I think that this book might have the most going on out of any of Brandon's books in the
Yeah,
Cosmere.
Absolutely.
definitely.
Yeah.
And he doesn't land every plane because not every plane was supposed to land at the end of this
Exactly.
book. But the ones that he does land I think, are really impactful.
I agree. I think that for me, there's the landed plane of Dalinar's story.
Mm.
And when Hoyd at the end says, I realize now that Dalinar is a storming genius, it kind of takes the full perspective of this first half of the Stormlight archive and, kind of makes it Dalinar's story in the way that the extended editions of Lord of the Rings makes
Mhm.
the story about Boromir from Fellowship, right? Like that's Boromir's story. It is his journey from kind of an Adolin-like character, but in also several respects, just a character who's on a journey, who fails and succumbs, but also has, a realization that like he wants to be a better person. He wants to be a better man and
Yeah.
take that next step. And I felt that strongly with Dalinar's character. I think that the importance of that decision is going to have ramifications all across the Cosmere. It is clearly, obviously, leading to the creation of retribution. But I think that what he got at was the concept of the shard power separated from the vessel, speaking to the shard power directly and say, like, you have more
Yeah.
to learn. And to me, that redefines everything because, like, there's not preservation and ruin. There's Ati and Laris and the powers of preservation and ruin. And that is mimicked with every single other of these 16 shards. And maybe things like the Aethers, non-shard entities in the Cosmere as well. So it just really redefined things for me in a lot of ways. And then I think that, like you said, more going on in Wind and Truth than almost every other Cosmere book. Where I feel like Sanderson did not do it great was in the Lost Metal, and we've talked about that at the end of Era 2. I think he did a very good job of bringing in the deep lore of the Cosmere, moving that through the importance of the history of Rashar, which is thousands of years long, and then having it be impactful to Dalinar's decision at the end. Like, I felt like he just perfectly blended the deep lore and history of the Cosmere with the present moment character motivations in the best way that he has done. And so that is why I think Wind and Truth is very good.
Before Brooke, sorry, before you go on to the Dalinar point, I think it is an unbelievable choice for Sanderson to make when he was literally touching the power of a god and he gives it away. And the last thing he does is he just sends these emotions to the people in his life that actually matter. He sends love to Navani. He sends apologies to Adolin. Someone who is given the power of a god, the last thing that he does is remember the people in his life. Like,
and trust them. Like, I think
yes.
that is like the thing that makes him a hero in the end,
Yes.
is that
Yes.
he doesn't try to do it all himself and
Right.
make himself the hero and like get attached to this idea of like, no, I'm supposed to do it, but that he gives up not only power but control, right? Of
Yeah.
saying like, wow, okay, I see in this moment that actually I can't have the answer and I have to trust the people that I've left behind, that they're gonna pick up the torch and keep going and
Yeah.
find a better solution. And like, I'm
Yes.
gonna trust their capability.
Yeah,
Oh, I
and that's
love
something
Dalinar
he
so
could not have
much.
done at the
Of
beginning of
course.
the book. Or at
Yes.
any point in the series. Like, he truly went through the hero's journey, and it's amazing. Ah, God.
I'm so
So
excited you said that because I am kind of at the beginning stages of writing an essay about the hero's journey and the heroine's journey,
uh-huh.
and Dalinar. And so this has been on my mind a lot lately.
Okay,
Coming
great.
not very soon, but coming at some point to some medium near you.
It was the
Can't
first
wait.
time that you've said it publicly, so I agree. Do you have any other aspects of Wind and Truth that you think make it great?
Yeah, I mean, I think the character journeys, as you have both talked about, are very powerful in many different circumstances. The lore, like just
Oh
from a
my god.
Cosmere perspective,
Yeah.
this book, I mean, my jaw dropped. I was so shocked when I turned the page on my Kindle and saw the first chapter from Tanavast's perspective. Like, I nearly lost my mind. It was so cool to have these flashbacks to the history of Rashar, to get this like first person perspective of all of these things that we've been wondering about and speculating about. And then to have new mysteries also dropped. To me, that was really exciting going into Wind and Truth, sort of expecting things to be wrapped. It was actually really cool to get these gifts of like new things to wonder about, which was Venli's storyline for me.
Right.
Yeah.
Fourth
I
moon.
the fourth moon, the freaking fourth moon. Just could not stop thinking about it. So those were really fun moments for me to discover like these little Christmas presents under the tree that I didn't know I was gonna get. I would say those are my top
Yeah.
reasons for why Wind and Truth is so great.
Can I ask a quick lore question
Yeah.
because you guys are more qualified than I am? Have one, the idea of he has been claimed by another, right?
Okay.
At the end of the
Yeah.
Yeah.
book with Dalinar. We don't know who that is, correct?
Correct.
Do you guys have guesses on that?
Do you want us to speculate? We
I
don't have the
think
answer. It's not been in like Word of Brandon. There's really
Right.
nothing that is definitive.
Right. I mean, I think that we can say pretty confidently that Dalinar has gone to the beyond.
Yes. Yes.
I've talked a lot about my sort of confusion that there even is a beyond. I was
Right.
always sort of assuming that the spiritual realm was the place that you went when you died. Like the spiritual realm was heaven, basically. But then we go to the spiritual realm in Wind and Truth, and it's not that. There's like a different thing. There's the
Yeah.
beyond, which is the place where the dead people go. And I don't really know like what that means. I have some speculation that ad nauseum was not actually capital G God, and that there is a capital G God, which is the God beyond, who is the God that
Mm,
like Dalinar has started worshiping. We also hear a God beyond reference, I think by Sazed and Mistborn. There's a
yeah.
couple places where this God beyond starts to appear.
Right. And the
That's like
Aethers
my
say like we are not of Adenalsium.
right. They're like, we're a separate thing. We were here before Ad
Yeah.
nauseum.
Well, and it's just an interesting moment because it seems like whoever claimed Dalinar supersedes the contract
Right.
that he made with Odium. So whoever this is has a level of command and strength beyond what we're dealing with someone who
At the
has
shard
one
level.
shard or even two.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like I can see where you're coming with that. And I almost wonder too, Brooke, if you're talking about the idea of like an even higher god beyond Aiden Alcium, is someone as they're observing what's going on throughout the Cosmere, and they kind of see Dalinar make a level of sacrifice that no other person faced with this situation that he runs into
Right.
being willing to make, really. I mean, Ven did give up the power, but I think there's like there's something else going on with Dalinar as well. Like it's almost like protecting his soul from being perverted
Mhm.
or twisted by odium, and then of course he chooses the cognitive shadow to become the blackthorn. But I don't know, I'm just like, that's like one of my biggest questions going into the second area is who claimed Dalinar.
So I'm going to bring it back down a level instead of go up a level
Oh, okay.
and say that what we have heard from,
It was Lopin.
yeah, the whole time, the Lopin, what we've heard from Brandon is that Dalinar is dead,
Yep.
that
Yeah.
his soul went to the beyond.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he's off the table in that kind of like respect. Dalinar is dead. What we have is the Blackthorn.
Mhm.
We think that's going to, be used by Odium, but the Blackthorn is a spiritual realm aspect or shadow, a spiritual shadow that was given life and connection by Dalinar, and we assume extra investiture by Odium. That's one version. But I think that what Odium wanted in that moment was not Dalinar's soul that is going to the beyond. It's Dalinar's cognitive shadow, which is separate from the Blackthorn.
Oh my gosh.
So it is Dalinar would create a cognitive shadow because he's so invested. He's near
Yeah.
Sliver because he's like some
Yeah.
kind of concept of Honor's power.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
he's kind of like the Lord Ruler in a way. And the Lord Ruler we see in Mistborn's Secret History has their cognitive aspect step into the cognitive realm and then says, peace. I could stay, but I'm not going to.
Mhm.
And then it goes to the beyond. So my concept is like, again, bringing it one level down. It's that Odium wants Dalinar's cognitive shadow and something, again, I don't know what the something is, but it's not that he wants Dalinar's soul. It's that he
Yeah.
wants Dalinar's cognitive shadow and he has to settle for the Blackthorn. That is very
Hmm.
speculative and it doesn't make a whole bunch of
Yeah.
like perfect sense because we just don't have enough information.
Can I I'm so sorry to derail this
No,
conversation.
This is
No,
what we
that
do,
we
baby.
live to serve.
So I wonder, we've seen through our interactions with the heralds and the therapy that Kaladin has given to them, that even though heralds are considered cognitive shadows, they are able to change and
Yes.
make new decisions and have new perspectives and things like that. I'm curious if through the Blackthorns conquesting throughout the Cosmere, if the way that we're going to still be able to interact with Dalinar is through the Blackthorn, this cognitive shadow starting to learn and make its own decisions and conclusions about what is right, X, Y, and Z. And the Blackthorn shadow almost has a similar journey to the real Dalinar
Got
in
you.
becoming a better man. I don't know how that would work within the contract, though, if that's even possible, given that
I
he is.
mean, I think that it would still be possible. And I think because it's not a pure spiritual shadow, but it's a spiritual shadow that Dalinar very specifically like pushed memories and connection into,
Yeah.
that there is the possibility that that will start to come into play. And like,
Yeah.
I mean, who knows how long the Blackthorn is like even going to be around or
Right,
what he's going to be
Right.
doing.
He might peace out in like
but-
Exactly.
page 10 because he's got errands to run, basically.
Right.
For
Yeah.
Odium.
But I think it's at least possible.
Yeah.
And it would be interesting to see like a different version of Dalinar start to tread the same journey.
Right.
I could see it happening naturally, but I think it would almost be more interesting if the Blackthorn is being used by Odium, controlled by Odium, conquering aspects of the rest of the Cosmere, and it's the power of honor that begins to subtly influence the Blackthorn
Right.
down the Dalinar path. And it's like the power of honor we know needs to learn, or that's what Dalinar wants to happen for the power of honor. What better way to learn than to be a teacher yourself? And so he goes out and teaches the Blackthorn and be like,
Oh
I
my
think you
God.
were like this when you were Dalinar. And maybe you should be like this, Blackthorn man. And the
Yeah.
Blackthorn's like, you are a shard, I guess.
Yeah.
kind of
He's like, the guy I met eating bread was not like you.
Yeah.
He was a much nicer guy.
Fun speculation. I'm very glad that we got some speculation into this podcast. We, thought it was only going to be interview, but no, we always get the speculative bits. So thank you for that aside. Where we were, though, is leaving us with the Stormlight Archive. books 1 through 5. Hayden, how would you rank these books now that you've had a little bit more time with Wind and Truth?
So I have come to a reckoning with this recently. I love all of the Stormlight Archive books, but you have to choose your favorites. I was most surprised by where Oathbringer now stands
Oh, interesting.
Oh,
because Oathbringer has my favorite Sanderlanche of all time.
yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I absolutely love Dalinar's story. However, I have Rhythm of War at number 5,
Okay.
Okay.
Oathbringer at number 4.
Whoa, I'm
Powerful.
taking this personally.
I understand. I think to me, as I remember my experience with Oathbringer, and this is all going to change on a second read through when I finally do it, is I was blown away by the conclusion to the trying to save Alethkar and the death of Elokar and all that stuff. And I was blown away by the second Sanderlanche with Dalinar's conclusion. However, I found much of the lead up where
Sure.
they're kind of just hanging out in Alethkar and trying to figure out some stuff with the Unmade felt a little sluggish to me. So
Mm.
I thought the highs of that book were absolutely unbelievable, and I struggled with some of the intermediary parts. Then at number 3, I guess we're at right
Yes.
now, I now have Wind and Truth.
Okay.
Wind and Truth, I think, doesn't quite have some of the like nostalgic benefits that
Mhm.
things like Way of Kings or Words of Radiance are going to have.
Yeah.
But the more and more that I sit on it, I really think that Wind and Truth was like a Herculean feat by Brandon, and I think there's so much more good in that book than there is bad. Second, I'm going to go with The Way of Kings.
Got you.
I mean, I mentioned the honor chasm, I believe, when we were talking. That's an amazing moment to me. The Kaladin swearing his second ideal, jumping over the chasm, and then Dalinar giving up Oathbringer. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
it's really a stunning conclusion to that book. And I think it kind of just made me go all in. And then first is Words of Radiance. I really think it is unbelievable how Brandon was able to pace a 1,200 page book perfectly.
Mhm.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, just from a literary perspective,
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's undeniable that Words of Radiance is a perfect book. Like
Yeah.
it just the structure of it, both like literally and with the character arcs,
Yeah.
it's a perfect book.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think there's so much going on. Obviously, honor is dead is an iconic line. But then when you also have Kaladin, you kind of think to yourself, okay, this is him overcoming his depression. Now he has to face one of the people that he loves and tell them that they're wrong. And his third ideal is unbelievable. And then of course he flies over to Zeth and says, I claim your life like I claim the sky.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, well, this is the
Epic.
most incredible thing I've ever read. So Words of Radiance is my personal favorite. But again, I haven't done a full reread of the series, so I think I need to reevaluate after I just go a clear 1 through 5 again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to do yours, Brooke?
Sure.
Okay.
I guess we're going bottom up. So this, and like you said, Hayden, it changes all the time. So this is my ranking today. Who knows what it'll be next week? Number 5, I've got Rhythm of War, which I was actually kind of surprised about because when it first came out, I was really excited by it because we get so much interesting stuff with the Navani and Rabaniel
Yeah.
storyline.
Light, anti-light.
But in my memory, I'm just like jaded now and I'm like, oh, we know that. That's like not exciting anymore. And all I can remember is the really repetitive and boring Kaladin storyline in that book. People are going to hate me for saying that, but it's not my favorite. Number 4, I've got Way of Kings, classic, but it's not as exciting as the other ones because it's the first one,
A lot of setup.
Yeah, a lot of setup. It's good, obviously. I read the rest of them, but the other ones are more exciting. Number 3, I've got Words of Radiance. Like we said,
Whoa.
it's a perfect book. It's a perfect book. It's very exciting. Maybe there's just a recency bias here because number 2, I've got Wind and Truth.
Nice.
Low-key, I love it. I respect it, honestly.
Yeah. I just feel, again, maybe just recency bias. I just feel like Wind and Truth, when I think about it, when I look back on it, it's so exciting. The whole book is a Sanderlanche. We're getting really the like meat and the juice of these character arcs that we've been following for so long. We get huge lore drops that are just like really mind-blowing and exciting. So it just, I think because it is so dense, it feels like there's just so much good stuff in it. So that's why it's number 2 for me. And then number 1 just can't be dethroned is Oathbringer for me. Like you said, Hayden, the Sanderlanche in that one is just the best. Dalinar's entire storyline, like Dalinar as a character, is so powerful to me. I think all of the storylines, like Shallan and Kaladin in particular in that book, are just really heartbreaking. And I think that is why it's like a hard read, because we're seeing these people like really at their lowest. And they're maybe not behaving in the way that we want them to behave. And I think that that's a good kind of discomfort for us to sit in. So that's why Oathbringer is my number 1.
Okay, I know both of you pre-planned. You know, you wrote your lists out. I didn't do any pre-planning, so I'm both biased by you and biased by my procrastination. But I think that I want to reflect what both of you have said. There's so many great aspects of each of these stories, and the degree of separation for my rankings is so small.
Oh,
Like we're talking.
I mean, again, it's like trying to pick a favorite child.
It's not like that. People have favorite children all the time. Some children are serial killers. Like you don't need to. Yeah, this is taking what I think is like near perfect and then artificially creating degrees of
splitting
separation.
hairs.
It really is splitting hairs to me. So like we are judging what I would say like on a 5-star ranking between 4.8 and 5.
To be clear, I rated them all 5 stars.
Right, exactly. So I'm just like, I'm inventing an infinity so that I can then do this ranking for you.
Degrees of infinity.
Yeah, and so I think it's all nonsense, but I struggle with this really bad. I don't know how to do this because I do give some credit to Way of Kings for the reasons that Hayden said. It's the first book. It starts everything. It introduces the characters that we love. But I hear what Brooke is saying. It's how could it possibly be as exciting? I'm going to go 1 to 5 because you guys have already, said basically the reasons. It's not a mystery anymore to me. Oathbringer is still my number 1.
Woo.
I cry at the beginning of Oathbringer. I cry at the end of Oathbringer.
I cried the whole time.
It's just from top to bottom a book that strikes all the chords for me. And I think that the fatty parts, Hayden, I'm interested if you will feel that way after a couple of read-throughs, or if like Wind and Truth, the more that you explore it, the more depth you will find in those
that
moments.
will be the case, yes.
And then you're going to say, wait, it still has my favorite Sanderlanche, and these things that I thought were like anchors now don't feel like anchors as much, and so it might go up the list. But for me, Oathbringer is still number 1. I think I'm going to put Words of Radiance at number 2, best structure, and a lot of great moments from that. Number 3, I'm going to say Wind and Truth. And then here's actually the most controversial bit. I'm going to say Rhythm of War at number 4 and Way of Kings at number 5.
Wow.
Whoa.
Okay.
Because I think that Rhythm of War has aspects of maturity to the characters and the greater Cosmere that Way of Kings simply cannot. And at the end of the day, there's 1 billion books that have great stories or cinematic moments that I could connect to. But I am a Cosmere nerd at my core. I want the super connections. I want to better understand the science of how Spren work and how light work and it transfers, and like all of that stuff to me is very interesting. And I think that, no disrespect to Way of Kings, but
yeah, I mean, obviously it started it all, but it also, it's only the beginning. It would be like me saying that my favorite Tyler is 15-year-old Tyler, like
that would be weird.
That would be weird. If
I don't
I was
even
like,
like that
no,
Tyler.
you peaked at 15, man.
That would be
like,
bad.
Absolutely not.
I think that like something that I give a ton of credit to Rhythm of War is giving us emotional catharsis for relatively minor characters, particularly with Teft and with Maya.
Yes.
Like going from Teft saying his, what was his third ideal? Was
third
that
idea? Yeah.
third ideal, and then unfortunately, Moash comes and fucks everything up like
Yes, he
he always
does.
does, and then Maya
Maya.
screaming, "We chose."
Yeah.
Like, I
Probably one of
mean,
the most important things that I think has happened in the Stormlight Archive.
a
Yeah.
complete paradigm shift,
Yeah,
yes.
exactly. And so like that's why I put that ranking there. Of course, degrees of infinity, but that's how I would throw them out. And I'm curious if Wind and Truth will climb. I think Wind and Truth has the potential to go to a number 2 for me. It would be tough to unseat Oathbringer because there's something about that time of my life, the actual story that's taking place. So like I'm biased against Oathbringer, but
Yeah, I
I
have the most visceral memory of reading Oathbringer for the first
Mm,
time.
mm.
so do I. Yeah. And so that's our rankings.
I would say that we should make a pact right now. 25 years from now, when Stormlight Archive 10 comes out,
Yeah.
we come back and we do a new ranking, and
Yeah.
inevitably, Wind and Truth is going to be number 1. I just can feel it.
It could climb. That's the thing about Wind and Truth is I think maybe the lowest point that Wind and Truth is ever going to be ranked is immediately after your first
Yep.
read through.
Yep.
And I think that
Yeah.
if you give it more time and more space and more reads, it's only going to get better.
Completely
I don't
agree.
think it is going to get worse on the rereads.
Yeah.
But I'll see you in 25 years, Hayden. That's No, we're going to see you so much more often than that. It has been
Yeah, I hope
so much
so.
fun to have the time that we did at Dragonsteel Nexus
Yes.
and to be able to connect here again. I'm glad that we got to get Hayden Unbound
Yes.
because that was fantastic.
Anytime you want to chat
Yes.
about the Cosmere, all spoilers, hit us up. We'll do it all day.
I really feel like Retribution right now. I'm like over here laying waste to cities as I'm just like popping off Stormlight takes. It's amazing.
Love it.
That's what we enjoy so much. Is you can say anything and just be
Yeah.
like, actually, the Aethers are the shards. They've taken over completely. They're interwoven. You can just make things up, and it's fun to go down the rabbit hole or the shard hole, whatever you want to describe it as.
I think you might want to take that one back. I think
Probably
if you
I'll
listen,
cut that
you'll be
one.
like, okay, we'll take that out of shard hole.
We're gonna cut that one out of the
It's gotta
system. Is there any other points that either of you would like to bring up before we call it here?
God, I just love these stories, man. I just love them so much, and it's so much fun to talk to people about it. The thing is, I do not believe we're ever going to touch Stormlight Archive on Fantasy Fan Fellas, just because
just too dense.
it's just too dense. And I think the purpose of the show is to serve as a way for people to propel themselves into other stories and like try things out. And I think Stormlight is something you have to have some priming before you actually go into it. So it's going to be, kind of relegated to bonus episodes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing because I have built-in excuses to bring you guys on whenever I
Yep.
want. So.
You sure do.
Absolutely. I agree. Again, thank you, Hayden, for being here. Please tell all of the listeners where they can find Fantasy Fan Fellas as well as Fantasy Fan Girls. And recent announcement last month, Lost Book of Jess is joining. I believe her show is going to be called Fantasy Fan Books. Is that correct?
So it's Fantasy Fan Reads, and the idea behind that show is it's a little bit more of like a chicken soup for the Fantasy Fan Girl soul. So we're going to be having author interviews. We're going to have like little one-on-one cozy corners with Jess where she's just going to kind of talk about the joy of reading these stories. We're so excited about that. You can find Fantasy Fan Fellas on Instagram at Fantasy Fan Fellas or on YouTube as well. If you just search us in the search bar, we're currently going through Well of Ascension right now. And folks, my co-host has never read any Sanderson books. So I am leading him on the most insane goose chases through the first Mistborn trilogy, and I cannot wait until the climax of Hero of Ages. I think his head is literally going to explode.
The only thing that comes close to reading the Cosmere for the first time is watching other people read the Cosmere for the first time. It's so good. Like, it is my favorite thing.
I was so mean to him as he went through. He was like, "Oh, so the Lord Ruler wrote the logbook then. This is definitely the Lord Ruler who wrote it." And I was like, "Yeah, you're totally right." And nope, it's Lindy, buddy. So It's just so much fun. So you can find us at Fantasy Fan Fellas anywhere on social media. Also, go ahead and feel free to check out Fantasy Fangirls if you're into the Romantasy stuff. We've got a lot of really exciting stuff. Also, one of the hosts, Nicole, just announced the title of her first published
Oh my
novel.
gosh, how
Wow, congrats to
Yeah.
exciting.
Nicole.
It is being published by Cosmo Reads, which is the imprint off of the Cosmopolitan, and
Oh,
it is going to be called Oath of the Chosen. So
Wow.
it
Okay.
is
cool.
a really exciting time for everybody in the company, and it's a crazy ride. We do way too much stuff. We have zero time, but we try to do it all. So please check us out.
Well, Hayden, thank you so much once again for being here and chatting about the Cosmere. I'm really looking forward to seeing you again at Nexus, and chatting Cosmere with you whenever you need some lore talks. We're here. We always end the podcast with the first ideal. We would love it if you would join us in
Absolutely.
saying that.
Brooke, can you take us away?
Until next time, life before death.
Strength before weakness.
Journey before destination.